Hey everyone, how's it going? Hope you're doing good. I'm doing great as always. Fujifilm has just announced their newest GFX body. This is the GFX100 Part 2, or the GFX100 II as they're calling it. And as a portrait and action sports photographer, this is a really intriguing and interesting camera and something that I was really excited to be able to go out and test in the field. So yeah, let's just jump into it and see how I felt about using the camera. First off, please understand that the GFX100 II that I was given for this review was a pre-production model, so there are some things that might have been improved on since I was able to do my testing, and also that Fujifilm has not paid me for this video in any way. I am free to say what I wish about the camera and just give you my honest opinion about using the camera out in the field. And also, lastly, please understand that this video is not meant to just run down the specs of the brand new GFX100 II. I want to look at it more as coming from an actual photographer and someone who might want to use this camera in the future and see the good and the negative points about using this camera, actually using this camera out in the field as a portrait and action sports photographer. So yeah, let's just jump right into it. So to start off, let's look at some of the new internal changes that have been done to the GFX100 II. So first off, the sensor is still a 102 megapixel sensor, which is the same size of sensor you find in the 100S. And I must say, coming from a DSLR shooter, that is pretty huge and pretty insane. It's a massive sensor. But also the new sensor that has been developed for the GFX100 II has an increased light capacity of around 30%. Now, I don't want to go into crazy detail here about what that changes exactly, but just know that this change in the light capacity, this increase of 30%, will bring down your native ISOs for both photo and video, and will hopefully make your photo and video both look better with less noise and clearer and sharper images. So what's more interesting than, ISO numbers and all that kind of thing for me as an action sports and portrait photographer is actually some of the bigger changes that have happened with this camera. With this new sensor, plus the addition of the X Processor 5, which is a processor being used in the GFX100 II, now the GFX100 II can shoot up to 8 frames per second on the mechanical shutter, and it can also utilize the same autofocus algorithm that is found in the Fujifilm's X-H2S, which I went into quite a detailed review of in a previous video, so you can check that out on my channel. Having this 8 frames per second, plus being able to use that with the new autofocus algorithm, really mixes things up and really changes what this camera can do over the 100S. So just speaking specifically about the autofocus algorithm that has been introduced to the 100 II, when shooting with the 100S, there was some facial recognition autofocus that you could use with the 100S, but it was pretty limited. It was good, but it was pretty limited. But with the new autofocus algorithm, you can actually go in, do face detect, eye detect. You can pick either the left or right eye to be detected, which is really amazing and something I did a lot during my portrait shooting, which I'll talk about later on in the video. And you can also set autofocus tracking for various different objects, such as animals, birds, cars, bikes, and even trains. Taking photos of trains is maybe not so popular in North America, but here in Japan, train photography is a huge niche market, so yeah, they've added that to the autofocus tracking as well. So another improvement, thanks to the new sensor and the implementation of the X Processor 5, is the quality of video that can be taken with this camera. Previously, the GFX100S maxed out at 4K video at 30 frames per second, but now the GFX100 II can shoot 4K video up to 60 frames per second, which is something I did a lot in my shooting. It can actually shoot 8K video up to 30 frames per second, and it can actually shoot a whopping 120 frames per second in high definition video. Now, just a couple little more tiny points of interest that people might have. The flash sync speed with the GFX100 II is still the same as the GFX100S at 1/125th of a second, so that stays the same. But the GFX100 II also has the introduction of an 8-step internal image stabilization system in the camera. So maybe you shoot portraits in low light, or you're a low light shooter, or you're someone who uses really, really long lenses. This could help you a lot in your shooting and help you stabilize your images when shooting out in the field. So that's some of the internal changes that a lot of people are really interested in with the new GFX100 II, and some of the things that I think are really amazing as well. But also there's a few external changes that have made to the camera to make it different over the 100S. So let's just take a look at that. So first off, when you pick up the camera, you'll notice right away that the grip, the feel of the camera is a little bit different. There's this raised design on the camera that will help you get a bit of a better grip on while you're shooting. I think not only does this new design separate it from the 100S and make it actually look pretty cool. When I was out shooting, doing my test shooting, every day it was like 33 degrees, 36 degrees. It was really hot. I was really sweaty, And this new raised grip actually really helped me keep a good grip on the camera when I was shooting, even though I was covered in sweat. So it's really cool, and I think it's actually quite a nice improvement and something that'll help people shooting when they're out in the field and it's a hotter day and you're covered in sweat. Now you may notice, especially if you're an avid GFX100 shooter, that the GFX100 II is a little bit thicker than the 100S. And I'm talking millimeters thicker. Like it's really, you can see them side by side, and it's not that much of a difference, but when you do pick up the camera after handling the 100S, you might notice it's a little bit thicker. If it's your first time handling a GFX camera, then I don't think you'll notice any really big thing about the camera. It's not a massive camera in any way. It's not super thick. But to get all those new improvements into the camera, I guess they actually had to increase the body just a little bit. But like I said, it's no really big worry when you're out and shooting. I didn't think of it at all as a, oh, big camera. You know, I'm used to shooting with a Z9. It's not a small camera either. So it's not a problem at all. I really don't think it's an issue at all. Now, something that's really cool that they've updated on the external part of the camera is these 3 programmable buttons that you can find above the display on the top of the camera. All cameras these days have various buttons around the camera that you can program to various different functions and things like that. But as my brain works, I've tried to do this with my cameras in the past, but I always forget what I've programmed it to. It's just a button. There's really no display or anything like that. So one day I might set it to this, and then the next day I forget what I set it to, and I try to go back, and it ends up just making everything more difficult for me. So I end up just not using the programmable buttons on my camera usually. But the really cool thing about these buttons on the GFX system is on the display, you can actually find these little icons that show you exactly which button is set to what. So you know right away just by looking at exactly what they're set to. The camera I was using was set to face detection on and off, object detection on and off, and exposure compensation. But now you can change it to basically any function you want. If you jump into the menu and take a look through, there's just a ton of different things you can change it to, and each one has their own unique icon. So when you're looking at the screen on the top of your camera, you can see right away what it is you're trying to change and what it is you set it to. I think this is an amazing little addition to the camera, and something I'm sure a lot of people who like to program their camera and make it customizable will use a lot when they're out shooting. Now, lastly, the EVF has also been greatly improved over the 100S. And just generally speaking, as I was using the EVF, obviously, while I was shooting, it was great, very smooth, very bright. I really had 0 issues while shooting with this EVF. Something that's really kind of unique and cool about the EVF on the GFX system is you can actually remove it, and you can attach, say, a tilt adapter, so you could shoot down if you wanted to and things like that, or you can just take it off entirely. So if you're using your LCD screen on the back of the camera a lot for video and stuff like that, you can just take it off and it just gets out of the way completely. Also, if you want to add a cage to the camera, so you can add on to the different things you would use, microphones and screens and monitors and things like that. Taking off the EVF makes adding the cage to the camera much easier. So yeah, it's a very, very good EVF. I think you'll have no problems using it. And yeah, again, just a couple quick notes of interest that people might have. The GFX100 II has the same card slots that you find in the 100S, a CFX Express and an SD card. And you'll also find all the various ports you would need to have on the camera. There's a full-size HDMI port, Ethernet port, a USB-C port, and you'll also find a 3.5 mic port on the camera. So you can attach all the things you need to attach to the camera for while you're shooting. It's great. Those are all the main selling points of the camera, and they're all really cool. Great improvements over the 100S for sure. But now, how was it like to use the camera out in the field, as a photographer? What was it like to actually get out there and shoot with the camera? So I had about 5 or 6 days with the camera, and the first thing I really noticed when shooting with the camera is how little I noticed that I was shooting with a medium format camera. The 8 frames per second, the introduction of the new autofocus, and all these things, the size, everything like that really makes it that you actually forget that you're shooting with a medium format camera. In the past, for my YouTube and for my professional photography, I've used various different medium format camera systems, and a lot of the times, it's a medium format camera. It's very large, it shoots very slow, there's sometimes shutter lag and things like that. There's a lot of hurdles you have to jump over to use these certain models of medium format cameras. The really, really great thing I found though is that I didn't notice any of that, and I forgot that I was even using a medium format camera, and I was just able to enjoy the shoot, have fun, and really enjoy what I was doing with my friends out in the street. Now, a few specifics, talking specifically about shooting 8 frames per second with the GFX100 II. 8 frames per second, it's pretty good actually when shooting action and things like that. It's kind of like the minimum you'd want to have when shooting action sports or anything with movement, dancers jumping and things like that. Of course, more would be better. 10, 15, 20 would obviously be better. But you have to understand, I was shooting raw files the entire time. Every photo I shot for my testing was raw. And each of these raw files is basically 200 megabytes. Every burst of a second or two, you're getting 8, 10, maybe 15 images. You're putting like a gig of information into your camera through the buffer onto your card. And it's like, that's a lot of information for the camera to deal with. Now saying that, when shooting, I never had a moment where the camera was like, hey, stop shooting. You know, you're doing too much. The buffer is going to explode. You're like, just please stop. I was able to just to keep shooting, and the buffer and that was able to manage the data enough that I was able to keep shooting and never had to stop shooting to wait for the camera. On the flip side, if I did want to review the images right away on the back of the camera on the LCD, there was several times where I had to kind of stop and wait. Maybe I took a really big burst or something like that, and there's a little red flashing dot on the back of the camera. I had to stop and wait for that, and then I could review the images. I wasn't using the best cards in the world for my test shooting, so maybe if you have faster cards and things like that, it'll help you out in your shooting. But just be aware though, if you are shooting raw with this camera in burst mode with 8 frames per second on the mechanical shutter, you're gonna be putting a lot of information onto that card very quickly. So it's, for some people, their cards might not be fast enough, so you might have to wait a second or two to be able to review the images right away on the back of the camera. Also, when shooting 8 frames per second, one thing I noticed that there was very little blackout when shooting these burst images and things like that. It was very easy for me to track my subject while shooting a burst of images, and I could see very clearly what they were doing and where they were going. In the past, I've used older FujiFilm and other cameras and things like that, and when shooting a burst of images, it was very hard to track. There was a lot of blackout, and it was very hard to see where my subject was going, so the action sports photography and things that I shoot, it was kind of useless. But in burst mode, even though it's a mechanical shutter, I was very surprised at how little blackout there was and how easy it was to track my subject. Now, if you do switch this to single shot, then wow, everything slows right down and you will really notice blackout when you're shooting with this. As you shoot, you take a shot and ka-chong! Take another shot, ka-chong, and it's total blackout. You're really, really slow down when shooting. You know, if this is what you prefer to do, shooting single shots like that, that's fine, but just realize there's going to be a lot of blackout in between those shots. But in the end, I think I would really recommend to just leave it on the 8 frames per second burst mode with the mechanical shutter. Taking single shots, you can do that. Every once in a while, you might take an extra shot or a mini burst of images, but you have very, very little blackout, and the whole shooting experience and flow of the shooting is much more smoother, and I find a lot faster and less aggravating. Because like, really, who wants to stare at that blackout for like a good second when you're shooting? Because that might be a moment that your model's now changed or smiled, and just, you might miss a little tiny thing. I really recommend you just leave it on 8 frames per second and just shoot away. So another specific thing that I really enjoyed using with the new GFX100 II was the new autofocus algorithm. It did take me a little bit of trial and error to figure out which autofocus tracking and things like that was best for which situation I was doing. Shooting portraits, the autofocus eye tracking in that was amazing. You know, I was shooting with the new 55mm 1.7 lens that's just been announced as well, and I'll have another video out talking just about that. But even at 1.7, the camera's eye auto tracking was amazing. I don't think I lost any shots due to misfocus and things like that. I should note, when my subject was standing straight on, flat onto me, and the eyes were basically the same spot, or the same distance from the camera, I should say, I did notice the auto eye focus little box jumping back and forth quite a bit. And for me, this was a little bit annoying. Like, you know, which eye is it focusing on? Is it focusing? Why is it moving so much? Just little kind of annoying things that kind of pop in my head when I was shooting. But if you find this is happening, you can easily change it to just the left eye or just the right eye. And this is something I did during my shooting. I would watch where the model's front eye would be, and it would change it as needed. And once you switch it and change it over, it worked great. It stayed on that eye the whole time, and I had no problems shooting the portraits with the auto eye focus. It tracked them great, and I really enjoyed it. Yeah, now when shooting action with this new autofocus algorithm, I tried a variety of different types of autofocus. Sometimes I found when I had the autofocus eye tracking left on when I was trying to do some action, the camera would kind of like, hey, where's his face? What's going on? You know, especially when my subjects were spinning, say, and they were losing the face in behind, their camera would get a little bit farty and move back to the back focus and things like that, which isn't great. And, you know, one time when I was shooting B-Girl Ayu, I actually had really good results with using the tracking and the face detection. So there's a bunch of different combinations you can use with this autofocus algorithm when shooting action and just anything in general. And so I really think that people who want to use this camera to shoot action need to go out and test it themselves and see which combination of autofocus works best for their situation. So one thing I should really mention here is that if you do want to shoot any kind of action with the GFX system, your lens selection is going to be critically important. The new autofocus algorithm update does allow for faster autofocus and faster tracking of subjects when compared to, say, the GFX100S, but There's many lenses in the GFX lineup that are not designed for speed and therefore will not be able to keep up with the movement of your subject as fast as the autofocus is. During my testing, I was able to use the 100 to 200 and a 250 prime, and for a lot of what I was shooting, these lenses were great and able to keep up with the action that I was shooting. I actually took the 250 prime down to the beach and I put the 2x extender on it and I was shooting surfing, and the autofocus there was able to keep up with the surfers out in the surf quite well. It was really easy to actually track them and shoot them while they were surfing. But lenses like the 30mm 3.5, now this is a great lens and it looked very nice, but it wasn't able to keep up with the action so much as with the 100 to 200 and the 250. And I also mentioned that I used the 55mm 1.7 quite a lot in my shooting, and it does have an internal motor, so it did seem to keep a better job of keeping up with my subject when I was shooting a bit of action with it as well. So it's a nice lens to use, and it was really quite good for that kind of shooting. But I think really, you're going to have to take out the lenses that you already have when using with this system and see if they're going to be able to keep up and track any kind of action you want to shoot. Maybe you want to shoot wildlife or birds and things like that. I think some lenses will be much better off for that sort of situation and be able to track your subject much faster and much better than other ones. Because really, when it comes down to it, the whole GFX system was designed for image quality, image quality, image quality. It wasn't really designed for speed. You have Sony, Nikon, Canon, all these other makers out there with these giant, really fast autofocus lenses and things like that. So GFX, remember, its image quality is the main aspect of it. This autofocus update does allow you to track your subjects more, and things for like portraits and stuff like that. It's absolutely beautiful. But your lens selection, again, is going to be quite critical if you're going to be able to keep up with whatever you want to be shooting. Now, after I got home from shooting, dumped the files into my computer and take a look at them. And of course, it's a 102 megapixel sensor, beautiful camera, beautiful lenses. So of course the images were beautiful. I really liked how they all turned out. I had no issues with the images at all. The 55 1.7 is a beautiful lens. I love the bokeh on it. But yeah, image quality with this camera is of course amazing, and it's really, really beautiful. One amazing thing about having a 102 megapixel camera and sensor is that these images are huge. Like I said, they're 200 megabyte raw files, and they're massive, massive pictures. So you can easily get in there and crop in, and you don't really lose a whole lot of quality as if I were to crop in the same amount with my DSLR. So if you're out shooting, say something like surfing or something like that, and your subject's just too far away from you don't have the super big zoom lens, well, don't be too afraid to zoom in and crop like crazy, and you'll still have a pretty, really decent image, and especially for social media and stuff like that, that'll be great for any client that you want to have. Another thing I noticed when editing the files is the dynamic range of the images was really, really nice. There was one point where I was shooting B-Girl Ayu, and then, it was already super hot, and there was a sliver of sunlight, and I decided to ask her to stand in that sliver, made her even hotter, and I was kind of like in a rush because I didn't want to have her stand there too long, so I didn't really set my camera properly, and I overexposed the images. A lot of times, overexposing them this much will kind of lose out on a lot of the detail in the whites. You'll kind of blow them out. But I was able to bring that all back down through some real quick and simple editing. So it's really nice that have such a wide dynamic range with this camera. So be very confident when you're editing the photos, even if you do mess up on the exposure here and there once in a while. And also, like I've said already in the video, this camera does really nice video as well. I shot a lot of video with this camera, all at 4K 60p, and it all looks really nice. Like, I'm not a video person, but I really like how the video came out. When you slow it down with the 60p, it's really nice, kind of like, middle range slow motion, but it looks really, really good. And I would love the opportunity to get out and shoot more video with this camera as well, because the video clips that I got looked really nice, and the auto tracking with the camera when you're shooting film works really, really well as well. So yeah, I would love to get out and have a chance to shoot more video with this, maybe make like a little mini documentary or movie or something like that. So yeah, that's the end of the review. I had a great time using the camera. I think the biggest thing that I take away from this is that how little you're using a medium format camera when you use this medium format camera. Hope that helps. If you have any questions or comments, hit me up down below. And, if you've stayed this long, it's a 20-minute video. If you watched it all the way in, subscribe. That'd be great. So yeah, cheers. Thanks a lot. And I'll talk to you soon.